If you ask ourselves, so what are they doing really? Like if you ask the question, well, they're bringing about forced change to our way of life. And the ultimate goal, of course, the complete extirpation of the mankind's inner sense of identity, the tearing out of mankind's innermost soul. You're speaking of the divine. It's a divine spark of reason. And the next step, we're building a society absolutely dependent on concentration camp technology to survive. I think, we don't want to be living in the Stone Age, but the idea is of the elite of what transhumanism is and how we understand it in a good sense of the word are two different worlds. What is transhumanism? Well, they think of Terminator, Rise of the Machine, Hollywood films, I, Robot, and other many Hollywood films as an image of transhumanism. But is this what the elite are working towards? It is the philosophy that supports the idea that mankind should proactively enhance itself and steer the course of its own evolution.
It all comes from the assumption that we are flawed to begin with. Daniel, it is an honor to be with you. I have followed your work. I am a huge fan of your work behind the scenes. We have a mutual friend that's put us together for the first time. Yep. This is completely unscripted. We don't know where this is going to go, and that's what makes it very exciting.
Well, we know it's gonna go well because you and I, we know what we're talking about. We have a lot of common interests as far as knowledge is concerned, and I think there's a lot to talk about. So, where do you see? Where do you see that going? Because we can talk about what transhumanism is, but today it has transmogrified itself into something. Well, I don't want to call it unseemly, but there's a lot to discuss as far as the direction and what we're going to do with it, and the fact that we have no language to really explain what's going to happen.
I am a fan of technology, so I am not anti-technology at all. What I'm seeing happening, Daniel, is there is a movement, and I'm going to use that word intentionally. I believe it is a movement. It is intentional. It's happened for a couple of generations now, where our young people are being conditioned to believe that they are powerless victims of the world around them, and that the very nature of being human, of a carbon-based form of life, we are flawed. And among the flaws that are being taught to our young people, they say the ability for humans to have emotion is a flaw because it clouds our logic and our thinking, and the ability, the way that we reproduce through physical intimacy is a flaw because it is random. It's by chance. You never know what you're going to get. And so we're being taught that we are a flawed form of life, and that we are victims of our external circumstance. And if you're a victim, it means you need a savior. And the savior that's being touted is the savior of technology. And we are in a generation, Daniel, where we're about to give our humanness away to the technology before we know what we're giving away. And this is my message.
That's a really good point, because again, I think you'll agree that from the point of view of the elite, we're at war. We are at war with the elite. And for the first time in history of civilization, there is a technological opportunity to create, if we're the Homo sapiens, let's call it Homo mejores, or whatever you want to call them. Yeah. How do you do this? With genome editing. So what's that? Well, gene editing is a group of technologies that give scientists the ability to change an organism's DNA, as you know. And these technologies allow genetic material to be added, removed, or even altered at particular locations in the genome. Let me give you a simple example. Growing a baby outside the womb is known as ectogenesis. And according to papers, scientific papers at the Deakin University study says an artificial womb would need an outer shell or chamber, and that's somewhere to implant the embryo and protect it as it grows. And so the artificial womb will also need a synthetic replacement for amniotic fluid, a kind of a shock absorber in the womb during natural pregnancy. And finally, there will be a way to exchange the oxygen and the nutrients, in other words, oxygen and nutrients in, and carbon dioxide and waste products out. Mm-hmm. So the researchers would have to build an artificial placenta, and the uterus, again, it's not a very complex organ. And so if you're the elite, you take an artificial uterus, you take an incubator, in the same way as it were an incubator for chickens, and then you have artificial insemination, and we genetically shorten the gestation period, and you get as many of this Homo mejores with limited cognitive abilities as you need. And today, technologically speaking, this can be done. And I think what most people don't understand is that we are losing, we the people, we're losing this war. Humanity is losing. And so I think what we would need to learn from the elite to change the dynamics of the game. Well, because they play a long game and we don't. You know, we plan the weekend, maybe next weekend. At most, we plan somebody's wedding 6 months down the line. And these people plan hundreds of years in advance. For example, at the end of World War II, in 1945, while the Soviets were celebrating victory over the Nazi Germany, the financial elite that created their Bretton Woods economic system, that's today's on its deathbed, they were already preparing the dismantling of the Soviet Union 50 years later. They outdid themselves. It didn't take them 50 years, but they were at it that long. So I think, again, what's under assault are not only our individual human rights, but the very institution of the concept of nation-state republic from the oligarchy's massive social engineering product conducted through Tavistock Institute for Human Relations and others, much larger integrated networks of these centers of applied social psychology and social engineering that emerged in the aftermath of World War II. And these groups regard us, the people, and the principles of nation state as it's kind of an axiomatic philosophical enemy. In other words, we're talking about behavior modification. So let me ask you this, from the point of view of science. Again, we could talk about transhumanism, human, transhuman, posthuman. What is the purpose, do you think, of this behavior modification we're witnessing right now?
You're thinking exactly like I'm thinking, because that's where I was going to go next. Because everything you said, yes, everything you said, and those things are all happening. But ultimately, Daniel, we're in the middle of a battle. You know, there's a battle for our thoughts. That's very apparent. You need look no further than the legacy media to see how it's called the fifth domain of warfare, how we're being programmed, our beliefs. There's a battle for what we believe about ourselves, about our origin. Are we the product of random mutations and lucky biology, or is there some intentionality? There's a battle for the way that we believe our universe even began. Is it random physics, or is there some causation underlying that? All those are happening, and everything that you're saying, Daniel, is happening. Ultimately, I believe they are all distractions from a deeper battle, and it's a deep and ancient battle that has been playing out for a very, very long time. It's a battle for our very humanness, and even beyond that. And I'm going to use a word, and then I'll define that word. There is an aspect of our humanness that is called divinity. And a lot of people associate divinity with religion. It has nothing to do with religion. If you look at the definition of divinity, it's really interesting. Divinity is defined as the ability to transcend perceived human limitations, the ability to become more than the limits we have placed upon ourselves. Humans can only be subject to control if they lose their divinity. And I think that's the battle of our generation. And most people don't even know it.
I also think if you ask ourselves, so what are they doing really? Like if you ask the question of the elite, well, they're bringing about forced change to our way of life, right, without our agreeing and without ever realizing what's happening to us. As you said, most politicians, 99.999%, have no idea that this is being done. No. And the ultimate goal, of course, the complete extirpation of the mankind's inner sense of identity, the tearing out of mankind's innermost soul. You're speaking of the divine. It's a divine spark of reason. And the placement in this vacant space that they've created of an artificial synthetic pseudo-soul. But to do this, in order to change mankind's behavior away from industrial production into all kinds of, pseudo things, and bring us willfully into this world of post-industrial era of zero growth, zero progress, Satanism, trans-industrial sixth technological paradigm, one must force first a change in mankind's self-image. Also, it's fundamental conception of what we are. And so the image of man appropriate to that new era must be sought out, synthesized, obviously, speaking Spanish, and then wired into our brain. And of course, over time, that's how we will become whatever, from Homo sapiens to Homo mejores. But by breaking the very basic value system, they extirpate the human being from this world, or no?
No, I see that. I see that happening. And what is the insidious thing that's happening now, Daniel, is in the old days, the attempt was to impose these things upon society, but that doesn't work because people will push back. So what's happening now is the ideas are being implemented through skewed and distorted algorithms in our social media, through regulation of legacy news media, to lead people into a way of thinking that supports the agenda that is being imposed. So people are actually making the choices that are destroying their own lives and their own society. I am seeing this happen so quickly, Daniel. I don't think it will drag on for another generation. We're at a crossroad right now. Something's got to give. Something's got to give.
Time. You mentioned something which is absolutely true. I mean, the whole idea of physical slavery, okay, colonization, physical slavery, force, brute force, that has been replaced by technological slavery. And again, in the past, it was done via military aggression. Today, you don't need to do that via military aggression. You do it with advanced technologies. Let me give you a simple example. Internet. What's internet? It's a digital gulag under the control of Big Brother within the confines of this permanent hybrid war. Except that in the gulag, whether it's the Soviet Union, North Korea, China, wherever, victims were whisked away at night and locked up in a concentration camp, placed behind barbed wire fences. And today, all these people voluntarily ask authorities to be admitted to the concentration camp. Imagine this. My internet is not working. Oh my God, how am I going to survive the rest of the day? And so people dream of being inside this concentration camp. And they live very comfortably and very happily within the confines of this make-believe world. And the collective degradation that we experience in society is palpable. So a world where physics and mathematics are considered racist subjects invented by a white race.
Yeah.
And if you tell people that everything they need to know is available for free in Wikipedia, or that there is no need to study, that you can use chat GPT to get you any information you want, to write any paper you want, and that everything is on internet, then 2 + 2 becomes 22. And the next step, we're building a society absolutely dependent on concentration camp technology to survive. And what I was saying, again, what you and I were discussing in the beginning about this move from humanism to transhumanism, okay? We're living in a world of meta-systems. Now, if I cut off your access to internet, most of these people will not be able to survive because they're empty vessels. The brain is an empty, clueless vessel. That's one thing. And the second thing, okay, has to do with human cognition. How do you think, Greg, human cognition fits into this global plan of control?
Well, this is the point, that the cognition is part of the divinity. When we talk about divinity, when I'm not doing what I'm doing now, I'm a musician, my wife is a musician, and we spend a lot of time with amazing musicians. And if you ask a musician, my wife was just at the Grammys, for example, earlier this year, and she would ask musicians, where did that amazing piece of music come from? Every one of them, every one to the T, will say it didn't come from me, it came through me from somewhere else. That is our divinity. It's our creativity. It's our imagination. We're talking about replacing large portions of uniquely human capabilities with synthetics, like putting a computer chip into the brain so that parts of the brain are no longer thinking and creating those neurons, or chemicals in the blood that mimic the immune response that the body already has. And if those chemicals mimic that immune response over long periods of time, the body's own immune response is compromised. And we know this. We know this from peer-reviewed studies. So I'm not saying don't use technology. I want to be really clear with our viewers.
I think we're talking about, you and I are talking about something else. It's one thing, we don't want to be living in the Stone Age, but the idea is that the idea of the elite, of what transhumanism is and how we understand it in a good sense of the word, are two different worlds. Because again, if you're thinking about what is transhumanism? Because again, people often, imagine if you ask anyone, well, they think of Terminator, Rise of the Machine, Hollywood films, I, Robot, and other many Hollywood films as an image of transhumanism. But is this what the elite are working towards? because that's the question, because transhumanism is really, if you think about it from their point of view, is this ultra high-tech dream of computer scientists and philosophers, et cetera, et cetera. It seeks to use this radical advances in technology to augment the human body, mind, and ultimately the entire human experience. It is the philosophy that supports the idea that mankind should proactively enhance itself and steer the course of its own evolution.
It all comes from the assumption that we are flawed to begin with. But so just to be clear with our viewers, if some of you maybe have heard of transhumanism and are not so familiar, there are actually 3 levels of transhumanism, and we're engaged in 2 of those levels right now. So first level is what we just talked about. If you replace a knee or a hip or contact lenses, you're using technology to enhance the human experience. That's level 1. Level 2 is where we begin to replace parts of the body with synthetics. And I'm not against this either. I mean, today, Daniel, we have the technology. We can 3D print a kidney and the epidermis, so skin tissue for burn victims. And that's a beautiful thing to help people that need that to a limited degree. The third phase is the one that I think is the stuff that the science fiction is made of, is where the thinking, and I've talked to some of these researchers, they believe that human consciousness is limited to ones and zeros and pluses and minuses, and can be that our personality, our consciousness can be confined to a computer chip. And if we are confined to a computer chip, then we become immortal. Because when one body breaks, you download the information into another body, a robot or another human. Ultimately, I think they're afraid of their own mortality. But the social implications, and we're seeing this with the AI right now, and everything that's happening with AI in our lives.
If you look at the constant breakthroughs, speaking of social implications in technology, which makes the transhumanist vision of a very real possibility for the near future. For example, you mentioned neurochips, neurochip interfaces, computer chips that connect directly to the brain are being developed as we speak. And the ultimate goal of this brain chip will be to do what? To increase intelligence thousands of times over, basically turning our human brain into the supercomputer. So you have lifelong emotional well-being is also a key concept within transhumanist movement. And they're saying that this can be achieved, Harari is talking about this, through a recalibration of the pleasure centers in the brain. In other words, pharmaceutical mood renders have been suggested, which will be cleaner and safer than the mind-altering drugs. Again, Harari. And this is Huxley's 21st century scientific dictatorship without tears. In other words, the era of the world controllers. And as Huxley said, there seemed to be no good reason why a thoroughly scientific dictatorship should ever be overthrown. And of course, the goal is to replace all the aversive experiences with pleasure beyond the doubts of a normal human experience. Nanotechnology, what we know about that, that's a pivotal area as far as the transhumanists are concerned. And so the science of creating machines, which are the size of molecules, and again, they're talking about Global Futures 2045 International Congress. That's their project. That's their vision. You mentioned Kurzweil. Well, he's talking about singularity, which is technology and biology together. And singularity, according to them, would occur at a point in which artificial intelligence surpasses the capability of the human brain. And so we're going to have from cyborgs with very long lifespans to downloading consciousness, as you mentioned, into the machine. Transhumanists say that it is impossible to predict exactly what this post-human will be like, but according to them, it will be better. So my question is, do we want to be an immortal transhumans or mortal humans?
Well, this is where this is one of those beautiful places where the wisdom of our ancestors, the best science of the modern world, and the technology that we have today come together in a really powerful way. So I am a multidisciplinary scientist, and it allows me, I say that because it allows me to stay current with new discoveries in many different sciences. And one of the things that's not being talked about, Daniel, but the scientists are pretty much on board with this, is that we now know that we are called anatomically modern human, AMH. And we know that we showed up on Earth about 200,000 years before present, 200,000 years ago. Scientists agree on that. The controversy is, how did we get here? The old story was random evolution, random mutations, and Darwin's idea of evolution. The problem is that new studies in genetics, through DNA studies, we now can extract the DNA from the fossilized remains of the beings that we used to think were our ancestors, the ones that we came from. And now that we have done that, we see that we did not descend from these earlier forms of life. We didn't descend from Neanderthal, for example.
You mentioned Hollywood and the films and parallel worlds. Well, transhumanists, they have big plans for humanity. And their star-studded project is called Project Avatar. Okay, human-like robots controlled via brain-computer interfaces, supported and financed by what? U.S. Department of Defense, via DARPA, via NASA, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And what's fascinating, Greg, is that David Cameron, the director of Titanic, Avatar, his futuristic film Avatar, and now a real world, they're almost identical. And so if you start looking at the elite plans and the film storyline, they're too similar to be coincidental. For example, did you see the film Avatar?
I have, yes.
Okay. Again, for those who might not have seen it, the film begins in the year 2154. Pandora. Okay. Think of the name Pandora. Is run by this corporate elite on top of the world. Okay. That's the one world government. This is not a free market enterprise, but total monopoly. Now, Earth has been mined, to depletion, and natural world destroyed, and the ruling elite won't hesitate to do the same with other worlds. And so to facilitate their planned exploitation of Pandora, a scientific elite works under the occupying military force, which in turn serves the mega corporations financing the mission. And so these towering 10-foot blue avatars are the result of individual human DNA fused to Pandora's humanoid DNA. They're called Navis. And once this hybrid body has been grown in a tank, what we just talked about before, okay, the team can transfer an individual's consciousness into these avatars, retaining the person's full identity. Are they telling us what they're going to do to us, and we're just too stupid or too blind to see?
There is... First, I love the movie Avatar, and it illustrates a principle that now has become a philosophy in some scientific circles. And so the philosophy goes like this, that consciousness informs itself through the things that it creates. So what we think is entertainment, it might be entertainment, but it also is our consciousness creating through books and music and sculpture and dance and movies what it is that we are asking ourselves to remember about ourselves. So if you take this concept and you look at some of the big, especially science fiction movies, Matrix, for example, the first Matrix.
Yeah.
Now, there was Hollywood shoot them up and they had to do that. But the theme of the Matrix is that there's a world that we cannot see that influences the world that we can see, and that we exist in both of those worlds. That's exactly what science is telling us right now. And you look at the film Inception, about our ability to, well, it's a very deep film, our ability to dream within dream within dream, and to actually interact with one another and have business deals. That's what happened in the movie. They would go into the dream state, seal the business deal, and then they'd walk into the boardroom and it was a done deal. But the people around them had no idea, what
That's
just happened.
That's the film with Leonardo DiCaprio, in case people.
Yeah, he was in that. And then you look at the films that the young people are being drawn to now. They're all about superpowers, Wonder Woman and the Avengers, about dormant powers in the human body. So when we see all of these, we have to say, if consciousness informs itself through the things it creates, what are we asking ourselves to remember through our entertainment, through our movies? When you look at Avatar, I think it's right on. I think you nailed it. And I think the Matrix, a dear friend, a colleague of mine, Dr. Bruce Lipton, we were touring Europe in a train the year that that the Matrix came out, and we were talking about the movie. And he said to me, he said, you know, people think it's science fiction. He said, but it's actually a documentary. And I had to think about that. He said, The Matrix is a
Very
documentary.
good
It's
point.
telling us about our relationship to the field. So I think I do. I think there's a lot of truth.
They
When you ask,
resonate.
yeah,
They have. Let me answer then the
yeah.
question, and then I want to see what you think. Uh, what are they afraid of? Well, let me ask a rhetorical question. How does the world work from a historical vantage point? Because what they're afraid of now, we've seen this before, is just we, the people, don't know our history. What's the ideology of the Western world? Well, at first we had slave owners, and they were fewer numbers, and all the others were slaves. And so this modus operandi did not obviously resist the test of time. And eventually the Roman Empire, okay, gave way to the feudal order. We're talking about between the 4th and the 6th century. And then the slave owners were forced to do what? To share some things with the former slaves. And this system, well, it could not resist the test of time either. And so feudalism gave way to modern capitalism, where each ex-slave bought a small car, a small house, a vacation 2 weeks a year, Disneyland, or wherever the hell they go. Why? For the simple reason that slaves were physiologically the same people as patricians, the slave owners. And so, first of all, they multiplied without any control. Second of all, they, the slaves, we, the people, the great unwashed, as Kissinger and Rockefeller calls us, we needed to eat 3 times a day, every single day. And third, we developed consciousness, you said, self-awareness. And so as a result, you had appeared again and again and again Spartacus, who wanted to become a slave owner. And so the system changed again and again. And therefore, the elite had this dream of creating a new subspecies who possessed a limited cognitive capacity and who can easily be reproduced in a synthetic or cheap way, what we're talking about before, the incubators, etc. And today, it's more than doable with transhumanism, with technologies, with the 6th technological paradigm, with a shift towards this new world. We've gone from industrial to post-industrial to trans-industrial, which is artificial intelligence, robotics, virtual world, et cetera, et cetera. And that's what we're at right now. And so for the elite, their problem is, it's called Greek paradox. To go to a higher level of advancement and technologically speaking, you need to dismantle everything which was built before. And that's why we're seeing the dismantlement of society, the industrial, the post-industrial world need to be destroyed for them to have their trans-industrial society of the future. And so we're at the point of this clash. As you said, who are we? You know, 2 different parallel worlds. Are we people, Homo sapiens, or we're a different species? And a good reference, you mentioned the Matrix, the film. And again, we're talking about which level of consciousness are we in? And how is that going to affect the future? So let me ask you, what do you think? What do you think the elite are afraid of?
I think they are afraid of our divinity. I think when we talk about the elite, there are levels of elite. And some of those elite, there are pawns, and there are different levels. Yes, there's a financial game. Yes, there's a power game, and all those I acknowledge. But on a deeply spiritual level, this is an ancient battle between light and dark, good and evil, I believe. And the way it is our divinity that allows us to love. A computer chip cannot love. AI cannot love. It can mimic the love of the algorithm that it's given, but it cannot love. It cannot imagine. It can assemble bits and pieces of information, but it is not creating something. It's not drawing. This is where the science is breaking down, because modern science has yet to acknowledge the truth of how our consciousness even exists. They're searching. Brian Greene, I just saw a video with Brian Greene. He believes consciousness is a phenomenon that results from the interplay of electrons and quantum particles in the neurons. He thinks consciousness is in the brain, when clearly the science shows us that the brain the neurons are antenna, biological antenna that tune us to something that is not in the brain. And that something is where our divinity comes from, our imagination, our creativity. Divinity is the ability to transcend perceived human limitations. So it is the ability to become the best version of ourselves. If it's only possible through DNA, tuning into that. If we're replacing DNA with synthetics, we lose that access, and that's how we lose our divinity.
The reason I asked is that, again, the global elite, they're convinced, you mentioned 2035 before, that by 2035, the first successful attempt to transfer one's personality to an alternative carrier will take place.
Yeah, well, this is the thing. It is no secret. They're very proud of what they believe is the future that they envision for us. They're very proud of the abilities to implement that future, and I think they honestly believe that they're doing something that will benefit at least some people. The question is, what kind of a world do we want to live in? I think we can't answer that until we answer the most fundamental question: who are we?
Exactly.
We are not.
That's exactly what I was thinking. Who are we?
Well, we are not the product of random mutations and lucky biology. Now, as a scientist, scientifically, I cannot say who or what caused those mutations 200,000 years ago. What I can say is it appears to be some kind of an intervention. That's all I can say scientifically. Now, my personal opinion, when I look at the evidence, I look at the cultural evidence from all the indigenous people. I look at the archaeological evidence that's coming to light. I look at the anthropological evidence. And now we look at the fossil evidence and the genetic evidence. All of it says that we are the product of some kind of an intelligent intervention. You know, the mutations that give us our humanness, chromosome 2. There's one gene, it's called TBR1. It's responsible for 80% of the neocortex, where it's the neocortex that gives us empathy, sympathy, compassion, the ability to self-regulate our biology when we choose. Other forms of life do it by instinct. We can sit down in a moment and say, in this moment, I choose to strengthen my immune system. I choose to embark upon a journey of super learning. No other form of life can do that. It's all because of those mutations, and those mutations are not an accident. So and we're only beginning to understand what that potential is. So when we look at modifying our biology, we're looking at modifying something that I believe was given to us 200,000 years ago that we're only beginning to understand. But there's another piece of this, Daniel, and it's really interesting. The Supreme Court, I believe it's 2014, handed down a ruling on genetic modification of life. And the question is, does natural biology, natural DNA, is a life form made of natural DNA given the freedoms guaranteed through the Constitution? In this case, it was in America or any other country. And because the pharmaceutical industries are trying to patent DNA. And what the Supreme Court said is you cannot patent something that is natural. You cannot patent the natural DNA. However, if that DNA is modified in some way, you can patent the modification. So if we are embarking on a journey where we modify our collective DNA, where it's being engineered, so it's no longer natural DNA, there are legal implications, there are implications in terms of freedom, and in terms of our rights as a form of life, if we are no longer natural DNA. And this comes right back to the transhuman, the whole transhuman idea. So, you know, you have to ask yourself, who benefits from a society that looks like this? Because it's not the average person. You know, the average person isn't going to benefit from a society like this.
If you kind of extrapolate, I'll go back in time to what, you know, to the roots of some of these ideas. Transhumanism itself isn't new. It's rooted in many ancient orders and the philosophy of eugenics.
Sure.
And at the heart of transhumanism, it represents this kind of an esoteric quest for godhood among certain circles of this elite connected to Freemasonry, occultism, science, technology, or in supposedly evolving superior being ethically replace lesser humans. And so this philosophy, we're speaking of Avatar before, is portrayed in the blockbuster film Prometheus. I don't know if you saw that, but
I've seen it many. I own it. I've seen it many times. Yeah.
Because the idea of Prometheus, that's a great film. I liked it a lot. It's disturbing to a certain point if you understand the meaning of it. But the idea, I think, of Prometheus is at the core of many of these ancient civilizations, the ideas presented in the film, which is at the heart of Western secret societies. So you have across the world, we'll see these early civilizations or their obsession with what they believe to be some kind of off-world influences. And we have from Nazca lines in South America to the pyramids in Egypt. We see artifacts with the testaments to early man's obsession, to all this off-world manipulation. And every ancient culture believed that they were communicated with men somewhere in the sky. And one could say that even that Prometheus is simply an art imitating life and putting a 21st century spin on the beliefs of this Dogon tribe in Africa.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. I've spent much of my adult life. I was blessed in the 1980s to begin traveling and exploring ancient and indigenous societies that I'd studied when I was a kid. And every one that I've gone to, Daniel, every single society that I've gone to, from the monks and the nuns in Tibet to the yogis in India and the sadhus in Nepal and all through the Curanderos and the Yucatan and the Quechua in the southern Andes and all through the American desert Southwest, all of them allow for a relationship with beings they call a family beyond this world. And it's an ongoing relationship. It's not an ancient relationship. It's a current relationship. So now, the Western world, we're in what's called disclosure. Well, disclosure happened a long time ago publicly. What I think people are waiting for is an acknowledgement on CNN or from Moscow or Washington, D.C. of these relationships. That's what they're calling disclosure. But the fact that we have interacted with and that we have technology from, other worlds, we have known for quite a while. So that's what I'm saying. This conversation isn't happening in a vacuum. So I'm just going to take us a little bit different direction. I have a number of friends who were working in an industry. They're therapists, and they were working with globally with what is called the abduction phenomenon. So people that have been, they believe, taken from this world. Alien abductions, and they've been tested on, or whatever it is that's happening. And when and then they have emotional problems from that. So they go to the therapists that specialize in this. So one of the first of all the different people, this was across different continents and from the 1960s all the way up through the 1990s. John Mack from Harvard University was part of this before he died. And the common theme is when the people are taken, they will typically ask, why did you take me? What is it that you want from me, or why are you interested in me? And a couple of answers come up that are, I think, relevant to this conversation. One of them is that a large number of the abductors, they say that we humans are at a crossroads in our evolution now, that the abductors were at a time in their history, and they went down the path of technology. They became machines more than biological beings, and they regret that decision. And they're warning us not to make that same mistake. They're saying, don't give your humanness away. Don't give your biology away. And then a lesser number of these, it was really interesting because what they called UFOs, they weren't aliens from another world. They were us from our own future coming back, saying that there was a time that humans made the choice to go the transhuman route. They became hybrid beings and they regret that decision. I think to close on this one, I want to leave our viewers with, we cover a lot of ground. I think ultimately we are on a journey to find the best version of ourselves. What does it mean to be human? And how can we awaken our humanness in the healthiest way possible to become the best people and to create the best possible world? And I think ultimately, every part of this conversation, we have to put it into that context.
Absolutely.
When we think about it from that way, I think it helps us to make good decisions in our lives and for our families.
Thank you so much. Take care, Greg.
Thank you. Take care.
Bye-bye.